So we've got a Craftsman YT 4000 this morning that has a 24 horse Briggs and Stratton on it. Customer brought it in, says that it's not running right, cutting in and out, things like that. This is the Craftsman Platinum 24 horse 724 cc XRD. So solid engines. I mean, they run pretty good most of the time. Let's fire this thing in. Pretty good this morning. Well, there it goes. Doesn't sound too bad right there, but when I went to bring it in, I mean, it was just spitting and sputtering, crackling, popping. Telltale signs of bad gas or carb issues. So I suggested flushing the fuel tank and the lines, going ahead and either rebuilding or replacing the carburetor. Now on these, a carburetor rebuild kit is pretty pricey, so I gave them a couple different options. I gave them the option of rebuilding the OEM carb or replacing the carb with an aftermarket carb. Now, on these, the aftermarket carbs that they sell, if you know what you're doing, they'll work just fine. But I do get a lot of questions every single year as far as how these things work, what's going on. People tell me they've replaced their carb and then they're not working right. And I'll show you why that happens on these aftermarket carbs when you install them. So, we're going to go through the whole process here from start to finish. First, I like to take the air cleaner off. Looks darn near brand new. I think we're tuning this thing up also. Obviously, it doesn't really need a air filter, so we're not going to worry too much about that. All right, so there's 2 1/4 inch, I believe, down through there. They've also got a slot for a screwdriver, flathead in them. Take those out. Then you've got 4 5/16 screws up in the top. We're going to take those out. And then there's also 2 5/16 screws here that hold the fuel pump on. I'm going to get all those out of there. And then the whole top will come off of here and will be basically at the carburetor from that point. Now you want to make sure that you're diagnosing this correct, that you're not just replacing a carb for the heck of it. Again, I have diagnosed it and I did give them a couple different options just to, you know, because we can rebuild this carb. It's not a big deal. But again, the aftermarket carb ends up not being any more money and ends up starting you 100% fresh. I think actually in this case it was a little bit cheaper. So we've got all these 3/8 around the outside here that we're taking out now. One over here on the back side. And you can just take those out until they're halfway loose. They don't have to come all the way out, but in my opinion it's easier to put it all back together if you do take them all the way off. So I normally take them, you know, completely off of there. Just seems easier to me anyway. It's kind of hard to get these guards back on if you're trying to fight against the lineup of the bolt holes originally. Again, just kind of my personal way I like doing it. Now the whole assembly comes off at that point and you're to the carb. So that's pretty easy to get to. From there, all we have to do is take the fuel line off, pull the clamp back, Get it back through. And now we are going to go ahead and switch this fuel out while we're here. Anytime I do any kind of carb work on anything, we never reuse their fuel. I don't care if they just told me they got fresh fuel. People tell me that all the time, and I look down in it. Next thing you know, there's water all down in it. It's kind of common, so we don't really discriminate as far as that goes. We just go ahead and replace it. The easiest way to do it. The best way to do it as far as quality goes anyway, because otherwise you go ahead and put it back together with that fuel in it and you're going to be taking it right apart again. So see if I can't get a little bit lower here so we can see exactly what's going on. Take 1 second to hook this up backwards. All right. I think it'd be kind of better from the bottom side on this part of it. I have to flip this whole thing upside down here. There we go. Working a little better. Okay. So we're at the carb. Pretty easy design on this one. Doesn't want to be where I want it to. All right, level out there now, will you? Okay. Well, I guess we're close enough there. Okay, so now we've got some T30 bolts that stick through here. There's 4 of them. So we're going to take those off. I also like to go ahead and just pull the choke linkage off. It just pulls straight out right there, out of the tab at the bottom. That gets you free, and you can go ahead and pull the wiring out of the solenoid off the bottom of the carb there. Again, these are T30s. And we're just going to use a long T30. You can also use a 3/8 in these. It just seems a little more difficult in my opinion. On the top, there's one here. Another one on the other side. And you've got one down here at the bottom. So we've got those 4 out, and the whole carburetor comes off at that point. Now there is a tube at the back that does have to be taken off, and this just pulls straight out. It hooks up to the back of the carburetor. I'll show you that a little bit closer in a second. And then there's another tube that's a vent here that comes off of the fuel tank. It's like an EPA tube of some sort. You're going to want to make sure that that just gets pulled straight off also. Just kind of pry it off. Get that last bolt out of there, off to the side. And then from there, we basically have the carb free. We've got to get this out. So what you do there is if you just tip it to the side, you can work it, pull it up, and it'll come right out of there. So just push it straight over, and now your whole carburetor is free. So your linkages and stuff are hanging, but the whole carburetor is off of there at that point. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the whole intake and everything apart. I'll get a little bit better view here, and we'll put the new carburetor on this assembly and then put everything back together. All right, so we've got a 7/16 socket here. I'm going to go ahead and take the 4 nuts off the front. And then it's got on the back side, it's got, I call them internal torques. They call them E-sockets. Not really sure exactly why they call them that, but it looks like out of the set, this is going to be an E5. So it's just got a torque that is on the inside. So I don't know if that's like an equivalent. I guess we could see here. No, that's not a T30. I don't know what exactly the internal is of it, but anyway, that's the one we need. Fits right on there good. If you don't have an internal torque socket like this, you can just use a pair of pliers on the outside edge. Now you don't want to grab anywhere where the thread is because you can end up stripping that out pretty easily, but if you grab just right on the tip and get it going, you need a good grip pair of pliers though. Otherwise, you're just going to end up demolishing these. It is a heck of a lot more difficult if you don't have the right tools to take it apart at this point. But so you want to pay attention to the orientation of this. I'm familiar with it, so I don't really pay too much attention. But one easy way you can do it is you can take a knife and just kind of mark. Just put a scratch in both the carburetor and the intake in a couple spots. And that tells you that's where it lines back up at. So just some way to mark and know exactly which way you're going when you're putting it all back together. It's easy to get this upside down or confused one way or the other. So, and again, this carburetor, I gave the customer the option. So the rebuild kit's actually about $100. So you got $100 plus labor. Aftermarket carburetor, I don't know, under 50 bucks. So we like to take it off just like such. And then what we do is we grab the other carburetor and we go ahead and switch everything from here to there at this point. It's just easier that way than trying to mess with it. So now there are a couple different styles of these, so you got to make sure you have the right one. So this is the choke-a-matic. So what that means is that the choke automatically springs back, and it is the same on this one also. Now they do make one that's got a separate choke other than, so this one works off of one lever. You choke is all the way up. Now they do have one that has a separate choke, and that'll be the one that's not the choke-a-matic, and it doesn't have this spring here. So it just kind of falls back down as opposed to how this one works. Now these are a little bit different. I'll show you that coming up here. There's a few differences that you do have to really pay attention to, otherwise this is not going to go back together right. So I do always like to open them up and inspect them before I install them. So I usually use the big vice grip pliers to get it started on something like this. And then go ahead and take it out. Oh, it's not a flathead there, so that's not going to work very well. Let's see here. Alright, so I've got my fuel pump going. It sounds like it's about done pumping the fuel, or pretty close. It starts to get kind of loud when it's done. So just take those two screws out, and again, that's the same as this one over here. Oh, that guy just popped out on me. I did pay attention that it did go here originally. Oop, I think that's the wrong way. Yeah, that's right. Okay, because it goes away from, yeah. If you lose those, just pay good attention to them. Yeah, so my fuel's done over here. Unhook that. Take a look on the inside real quick. See exactly what this one looks like. There was a little bit of debris in there. Nothing too major. I just like to blow everything out, make sure everything looks good. Everything in this case does. Should go back together real nice. Yep, just popped right back together. So that's good. A lot of times they'll have debris or something in the bottom of them though. You want to just make sure that that's not the case. If it is, you know, you're going to run into issues as soon as you put this back together. And then basically from there, you're going to have to take the whole thing back apart and repeat this process. So nobody likes to do that. Just do the quality control. Takes, as you see, I don't know, a minute. So anyway, take this linkage out of the same spot that we took the other one out of. And go ahead and hook it up. And then we're also going to take this linkage out. So it's a little bit different. It hangs there to the left. We'll take it out just like such. And then again, I always like to do them one by one. That way you can't really mess it up too bad if you're doing them one by one. You're not going to forget where they go or lose the position of anything. So that's all set. Everything's nice and smooth. All of the other gaskets are off. Blow all that out. You don't want all that dust down in there when you're doing it. So now we've got the issue of the gasket. So if you pay attention, there's a metal gasket in here. If you look, it bows out away from where the throttle goes, just so it doesn't hit the throttle. I see a lot of people put them back together and they put them together towards the carb and they will hit. So we'll get the new ones out here. Now this kit comes with everything you need. It does come with some extras. Like these here, I do not use those. So those are like a replacement if you're not going to use the OEM gaskets, which are these orange guys here. I would not use those. I'd use the orange ones again. That's what's supposed to be on there originally. That's what I put back on there. So these were in pretty bad shape, but we're going to put new ones on before we put it all back together anyway. So, wow, it does look like that's almost bowed there for some reason. Hopefully that doesn't cause us an air leak issue or something to that effect, but it's kind of strange. I've never really seen one quite like that. We will test for it when we put back together. It actually sounded pretty decent when we were just running it, so hopefully it doesn't have an issue with something like that. So we're going to put these all together. They're going to go just like such. Now I'm not sure why these have little notches out of them. I think those are misprints, honestly, because they should be solid just like this back piece. Not going to be a big deal. It's still going to seal and everything there, so we're not really too worried about it. But you want to make sure those bulges out come away from where the choke's going to hit. So just like that. And then that, so there's one gasket and then the metal plate and then another gasket, and then that's ready to be put back together. It's ready to be put back on. So as long as you have the same orientation, you can put it back on. And I'll show you what you really want to pay attention to when you're putting this back on. Now, I'm only grabbing two for now because I want to show you what normally happens on these. I don't know if it will on this one or not, but it sure looks like it. Okay, so we're getting this thing back together. Let's say we tightened all those down or whatnot. Man, that gap really looks bad there, so I'm not sure that might have to get a new tube. As we're moving our throttle down, you see how that's not going all the way? It's actually hitting here on the plastic piece of our intake. That's not good. So what you're going to want to do, if you're using an aftermarket carb on this, you're going to want to notch that intake there out. So I think we're going to do that real quick. I'm just not sure that that gap's ever going to fill as far as this goes. So I think I've got another intake tube over sitting to the side. If I do, maybe I'll grab it, throw it on there as opposed to this one. If not, we'll go ahead and get a new intake tube coming for the customer. I'll be right back to kind of show you that. All right, so we're back here with one that's better sealed. And again, all I did was kind of took a Dremel and I notched out right down through there. So I just took some of that plastic off. So now we're able to go all the way down as far as the throttle goes. So again, if it's not matching up good here at the top, you're going to want to go ahead and replace the intake tube. You got to make sure that that's going to be sealing right. So it doesn't look right, it's not right. Everything should move freely when you're moving it. And now it's time to put the front back on, just like such. And you got your 4 7/16 to go back on the top again, or on the front. You just always want to pay attention before you're putting it back together that everything moves correctly, because if it doesn't, you're doing yourself a disservice putting everything back together when you're going to have to just take it right back apart. So there we have it. The carb is all installed. Everything's exactly how it should be. Now we're going to go ahead and put it back on the unit. Now we will want to install 692138 O-ring seals. We use the OEMs on that. Oops, dropped it down over there. We use the OEMs on there each time. Don't mess with much aftermarket stuff in certain areas, but you do want to make sure the mating surface on the block is in good shape also. You don't want it to have any debris or anything on it. If you do, you're going to run into an air leak issue. So make sure those are popped in there good. If they won't stay in, you can add a little bit of grease. That'll keep them on down in there. Let's get this reinstalled. So we're ready to put everything back together. Put it back together 100% opposite of the way you took it off. So we'll start with the linkage here. Again, make sure it's all cleaned up here. I cleaned it up here. And then make sure all around the inside of the blower housing, you want that all to be nice and clean. If it's not, you'll overheat. It doesn't take but a second to use an air compressor and blow it out. So Now that again just latches right back in there. If you pull it to the side, you can get it to latch up underneath. And then make sure your gaskets are again in good shape. And you can go ahead and push that now straight against and go ahead and tighten down all these bolts. Now I do like to go ahead and start everything before we do much tightening. These are kind of tricky. They don't like to go back in real easily. They've got kind of that Loctite on the thread, which is all fine and dandy. I think it's kind of overkill for what we're doing here. I've never seen them back out, but they did it for some reason. So again, there's 4 of them, 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. Now you want to make sure they're started straight for sure. So I've got all of them started at this point. Go ahead and tighten them all down. Alright, and again, there's Loctite on them. That's why they don't, want to go in nice and easy. They will thread on down in there. Now again, you can go ahead and make sure that everything moves freely and it opens all the way. If it's not opening all the way, you still got some restriction somewhere. So on the bottom side, we go ahead and plug our wire in here for the solenoid. And then we can go ahead and hook up the linkage for the choke. Now the choke linkage, again, it just pulls, you pull the piece straight up and then you push it in to the little notch. So pull up and push in. Not sure that you could see that real well. Looks like the solenoid's kind of in the way. So if you push that and just push the linkage directly into it, let's take that back out. Just push the linkage directly into it and it'll snap on into that adapter there. So that gets the carburetor all back together except for the grommet in the back, and it just goes straight in. You just kind of push it in there. So you can kind of see it up top here on the back side, on the inside. Just push it through, and then your hose up here just goes back on that hose barb, reinstalled. Nice and quick and easy. And then your fuel line, and I went ahead and drained that fuel again. You don't want that nasty stuff back in there. If it was nasty, I'm not really sure. It didn't smell great, but it's hard to tell. People tell you that they go get fresh gas all the time, and then you ask them where they got it from, and they say, oh, well, that's just Casey's down the street. And it's like, well, it is definitely a discount station, They a lot of times have their gas, that they buy from other places that are there for, I don't know, 30 to 60 days before they actually buy it. From what I understand anyway. I can't tell you for sure that that's the case. Not exactly a fuel expert or anything like that, but from what I understand, that's how it goes. Alright, so we'll go ahead and get the top back on now. And it does slide. There's a couple grooves here that slide into the top of the air cleaner box. So on that intake on the top, you got to slide it kind of down in. Make sure you got everything lined up, and then you're good to go. So I'm just going to put a couple of them back in just so it doesn't fly off here. We'll do some testing, and then I'll finish putting the rest back together later. I do want to get a fuel filter on there. I did take the other one off pretty much all the way at the beginning when I was flipping out the fuel. Of course, I don't know where there's my 3/8. I did on the side. Get that not to come quite right. And again, it's never a bad idea once you get everything put back together. At this point, you're pretty well safe to run it as long as you keep your fingers and stuff out of the way. So it's not going to hurt you anything to run it at this point. And then if you've got something wrong at this point, what you can do is you can take it right back off and you're right here at the carb again. You don't have to go through those next steps. So it's always good step by step. Things are missed, things don't turn out right all the time. And if you test those things the quickest available time to test them, it'll cost you the least amount of time in the long run if there ends up being an issue. And if not, it doesn't cost you anything anyway because you had to do those testing. You've got to got to run it at some point, so it doesn't really cost you any extra time. You're already here. All right. So I'm gonna put some, back that camera up real quick, put some fuel in it. See what this thing sounds like. Again, before the customer said that it wouldn't run evenly, and then I believe it wouldn't run off choke at some point also. But should solve all of our problems and we'll be back into action. They'll be good to go for years to come. Apparently my gas can wants to leak all over. Whoever got gas either didn't seal it or the O-ring's missing, one or the other. Alright, so fueled up. It'll take a few seconds to start, of course, because it's got to get fuel up there to the carburetor. And you can test that solenoid, if you'd like, by turning on the key. You should hear it click. You know, there should be an audible click at that solenoid. You should be able to feel it or hear it if that solenoid's working properly. And what that does is that just opens up to allow those jets in there fuel. If it doesn't open up, you're never going to get fuel. We're still getting a little bit of surging from the thing, still getting a little bit of popping and crackling. I'm gonna go ahead and switch out the plug, see if that solves the issue. If not, I mean, I've already sprayed it down. What I was doing here is spraying, looking for air leaks. If you spray in between the carburetor and the intake, and your speed changes or your running changes at all, you know that there's an air leak somewhere. So if you're spraying there, or also spraying in between the intake here and the block, if that changes, you know, the running changes at all, then you know you have an air leak at that point, and that's what your issue is. So you want to be careful. The hot muffler's right here. If you drip something down there, you could cause a fire very easily. But we're still getting a little bit of surging out of it, and I'm not really sure why. Nothing changed really at all when I was spraying this. I wonder if it had just a tiny bit of bad gas still, you know, in the fuel line, or what's going on exactly. But this thing should be rock solid in a very short period of time. I don't think there's really much going on with it. So hopefully once we change the plugs and let it run here for a minute, it clears up and everything like that. Now you can adjust your low throttle just with a Phillips head screw right here. If you turn it in, you go clockwise, that's going to keep it from coming back so far, keep it from running so low. But you don't want it running too high when you're all the way low throttle. So that should at least give you all the information you need to know to get this thing back into working action. You know, we do quite a few of these every year, never really have any issues. That's why this one's kind of a funny one as I'm doing the video on it, but at least that kind of gives you a little bit more insight if you are having issues at this point, that you can, you know, check for the air leaks. Again, just in between the block and the carburetor, in between the in between the intake and the carburetor, and then in between the intake and the block on both sides. So here and here, and then around here. Again, be careful. It could cause you some issues with fire and things like that. So always be prepared for those possibilities. But thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.